I think Stefan and Krishnan that we should get started, although some people are getting late. I think we should start at 8:30 sharp. Is that okay with you guys?
We can give it a minute or two more, I guess.
It's 8:30 now.
Yeah.
Hi, Erika.
Morning.
Good morning.
And good morning to Chris still. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, I can see you, Krista. Hi. Great to see you too. Alumni. We love that. Du är med och släpper in Stefan, eller hur?
Yes.
Now we have Stefan Skoglund with us as well, so I think we should just get started. Good morning, Stefan.
Good morning, everybody.
Let's kickstart.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah. You didn't even have your coffee yet.
No, I just came in to the office here right now.
All right. So
Ready to
today
go.
we're going to talk about an untapped market from our perspective in the Nordics, a rather large untapped market as well. So I think this is going to be, sorry, what?
Start recording.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
So
Perfect.
I lost the track now.
Yeah. We're going to talk about. I don't know where we were going, but at least we're going to talk about market entry into India. Yeah, and it's a market that's not always, a market that the companies that we are working with are thinking about.
Yeah,
and we want to change that. We think it's an amazing market. But usually people say we want to go to Germany, we're going to go to Norway, they're going to go to Sweden, they want to go to UK. But where is India? So we want to change that.
Yeah, and if you look at the size as well, I think we'll be surprised. We're looking at rather small markets, I think.
Yeah.
Compared to some rather huge markets here. And Stefan Pettersson, you were the one that were actually pushing this and said we really have to do this. Can you give us a little bit about your story, why you wanted to have this mentor session today?
Yes, I can, because I was irritated by Nordic startups. They are going to start out in Norway, do a little bit in Sweden or vice versa, and then they are going to Silicon Valley. And I was thinking, why? Because the American market is 375 million people. India, on the other hand, has 1.5 billion people. And 30% of those people are living on a Scandinavian middle class standard, if you count in the over middle class and lower middle class. So it's actually a functioning United States of America in a very good way. And it also, I was Googling this and was using ChatGPT to see where this is going. And when we come to 2031, today is 30% of the population that lives on the middle class level. And that is actually planned to be around 58% in 2031. And it's just a few years there. So it's the biggest market in the world. So why neglect it? That's why I talked to Chris, and I really want to do this to see if we can. There are cultural differences between especially the Northern Europe and India, but we have to learn about this, how to do this in a way. And it will be helpful people in both ends.
Excellent. Thanks, Stefan. And before we let you in, Chris, I'm just going to give a short brief on this hour, how we're going to structure it. So if you do the presentation, Chris, for about, let's say, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, something like that, then we can open up for Q&As the last 25 to 30 minutes as well. Because I'm quite sure that there's a lot of eager entrepreneurs out there who wants to know more. So what do you say? Should we just take it from there?
I think so.
And Krish, thank you very much for offering to do this, and because we know that you are the right person to actually make the introduction to us, because you have the perfect background in medical industry and in business industry. So please, Krish, the scene is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Stefan, for giving me this opportunity to be here and present this on the Indian market. I hope all of you are able to hear me clearly, right? Good morning. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. So just to give a brief, you can just call me Krish. I'm based out of Mumbai in India. I have more than 3 decades of experience in the medical devices space. I'm currently associated with Vigor Healthcare, which is actually a company which is headquartered in the Netherlands. We essentially support global medtech companies, global digital health tech companies, which are expanding in the Indian market. So just to give you a brief on this, we will see what the Indian market is about. Okay. From a macro level, India is currently the world's most populous nation in the world. We overtook China a few years ago. So currently, as Stephen pointed out, we are a country of about almost 1.4 to 1.5 billion people. Currently, India is the 4th largest economy in the world. We just overtook Japan. So after United States, China, and Germany, these are the top 3 economies. India is the 4th largest economy currently in the world. India is also one of the fastest growing economies. We have a growth rate about 6.5%, which is one of the fastest growing as far as the IMF data is concerned. The largest economies. India is quite stable politically and economically. So India happens to be one of the most attractive markets in the Asia region. There is large unmet healthcare needs. As Stephen pointed out, there is a chunk of population which are the super rich. We have people who are in the world's richest people, just below Elon Musk. But we also have a middle class, and then we also have the lower middle class, which is actually supported by the government. So there is a large unmet healthcare needs as far as India is concerned. Indian medtech market, it is the 4th largest in Asia. We are after China, Korea, and Japan. We are the 4th largest. The biggest advantage of the Indian market is most of the Indian our business transactions are done in English, unlike China and Japan. So that is a very distinct advantage for us. Currently, the Indian medtech market is valued about $18 to $20 billion, and there is a lot of thrust from the government of India to focus on the medtech market. So we have an ambitious project to get to $50 billion by 2030. The next 5 years, we hope to achieve $50 billion. Currently, about 75% of the medical device needs, as far as 75 to 80% of the medical device needs, are imported into India. So India is largely dependent on global healthcare technologies. There are many companies which are foraying into the Indian market at the current juncture. Just to give a context, India recently signed the free trade agreement with the UK. We also signed it with the TIPA agreement, which is essentially between Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, etc. India is on the verge of signing the free trade agreement with the EU. There are advanced discussions going on, and probably by the end of this year, there could be a potential free trade agreement between India and the EU. Essentially, the private healthcare, India is not driven by the health insurance market. Private healthcare drives the adoption. So unlike some of the other major markets, which is driven by the health insurance, India is not driven by the health insurance. So here, in case a person goes to visit a doctor or a hospital, most of them will have to pay from their own pocket. There is health insurance, but that is predominantly focused on about 5% of the population. The large population depends on out-of-pocket expenses for medical needs. India, therefore, is an extremely price and value sensitive market. So till about a few years ago, the medical device rules regulatory were not very classified. About 5-6 years, till about 5-6 years ago, India, anybody could import any device into India and start using it or start selling it. But for the last 5-6 years, the rules have become a little more stringent. India essentially follows the FDA type of regulations because the EU MDR is a little more complex. So India still follows the FDA type of regulations. The devices are categorized into class A, B, C, D, depending on the risk element involved. So A is the least risk device, and D is the most riskier device. Currently, FDA, EU, MDR certified devices are easier to enter into the Indian market because there is already a classification which has been done and India follows that. So it becomes easier for those devices which are classified either the CE marked or the FDA approved. It becomes easier for that. Ideal for product which has both software and the hardware components. The software as a medical device, which is essentially the AI-powered devices, the digital health devices, requires certain amount of tailored approach in terms of Indian regulations. The SAMD regulatory is still evolving as far as India is concerned. We still do not have those stringent requirements which are part of the EU MDR, but still there is a requirement in terms of classifying the digital health or the AI-powered medical device into the regulatory space. But there are certain companies, global companies, which do sell without the regulatory approval also, specifically on the AI-powered software devices, because that is just a link and essentially does not pass through the Indian customs port. What happens if there is a component, a combination of hardware and software, it has to pass through the Indian port of entry, and then the regulatory checks happen. But if it's just a link which is forwarded across to the customer or to the distributor, the rules are not so stringent. So there are certain companies which still operate in India as far as the digital health is concerned without the required certification specifically for the digital health or the AI-powered devices. So market entry, what could be the pathway on this? Even though the device is classified as EU MDR or the FDA approved device, Indian doctors travel widely. They are quite aware of what's happening internationally. Many of the doctors travel to conferences, exhibitions, etc. So they exactly know what is happening worldwide. But still, there is certain amount of local requirements which has to be satisfied. So generally what happens is the key opinion leaders play a major role in terms of adoption of a device. So generally, if it's a new concept which is working either in Europe or in the American market, has to address the Indian market, generally to gain some market traction, the device is, a few KOLs start doing the pilot studies for the company so that there is market traction which is available. The distributor onboarding comes subsequently on this because Indian distributor or generally worldwide distributors are more attracted when there is a low selling cycle. When the selling cycle has to be fast, it cannot be a longer selling cycle. That's when the distributors get interested into the product. If it's a conceptual product, the product has to gain some market traction before the distributors can be attracted. So initially there's a pilot study, market traction which happens, and subsequently the distributor onboarding happens. Now, as we are all aware, as part of the regulatory process in India, the parent company, the global company, either has to have a subsidiary in India or has to have at least one distributor in India before the regulatory approval can be provided. So that becomes as an essential. So it is important that there is at least one distributor who is on board to complete the regulatory certification process, and then subsequently the scale up can happen by onboarding more distributors. That is the market entry pathway. What is the pilot study strategy? Generally, the pilot study is done with the key opinion leaders, probably in 2 or 3 cities. As most of us are aware of, India is a big country. There are about 28 states spread across in India. So India is roughly divided into east, west, north, and south. These are the 4 zones. I am based out of Mumbai, which is in the western part of India. New Delhi, which is the capital, is the northern part of India. Then you have Chennai, Hyderabad and Bangalore, which are on the southern part of India, and Kolkata, which is in the eastern part of India. So India, even though is a single large market, because there are 28 states, it's actually, we could say, 28 different markets. It's something like an European Union. You will have to do a lot of groundwork in terms of the 28 states, etc. The overall Indian pathway as far as the medical expansion is concerned is more or less similar, but there has to be groundwork done in each of the 28 cities in terms of distribution appointment, in terms of interaction with the key opinion leaders, etc., for the product to exactly gain traction. So that's why the targeted the pilot studies done with the key opinion leaders in 2 or 3 cities, probably in some of the major cities like Mumbai, say Delhi, Hyderabad, Bangalore, etc. And that's how the market traction happens and the distributor gets onboarded. Focus on private clinics, because that's where Indian market, 80% of the market is controlled by the private segment, private healthcare segment. So that's where most of the traction would happen. So always when a market expansion is done, we always focus on the private segment of the market. Obviously, there is procurement which happens in the government segment also, but then there is a little cumbersome process. There is tendering, etc., which happens. So there has to be certain market traction and installation base before a global medtech company can qualify for quoting for the government business as far as India is concerned. So generate adoption and traction, because product adoption is important, and then obviously the market traction would happen. Distributors typically join after successful pilots. When there are a few key opinion leaders who have started using the product, adopting the product, that's when the distributors, it starts attracting the distributors, and the distributors join, from different parts of India to scale up as far as the volumes are concerned. So what would be the ideal go-to-market strategy? If it's a hardware-based product, which it's a combination of hardware cum software, that would be an ideal product as far as the Indian market is concerned. It could be a pilot study followed by distributor focus. That would be the right pathway for a combination of hardware and software medical device. If it is AI or digital health, which is essentially software-driven, then the adoption by a few clinics becomes important, and the value proposition. When I say value proposition, because it's a software being used, unlike, as I indicated earlier, because the Indian market is not driven by the health insurance. So every doctor or every hospital who buys an AI-driven or a software product has to first of all be convinced on how the software could help in his workflow. And if there is a cost involved as far as the product is concerned, how is it that he can recover this cost from his patients? Because the ROI, the return on investment, becomes critical, because the patient pays from the pocket and the doctor or the hospital invests their own money in providing the additional facility to the patient. So ROI, or the value proposition, becomes a key factor in terms of the decision-making process. So ROI-driven adoption, and distributor role evolves with scale. Once the scale happens, once there is traction, once there is a lot of noise created in the market in terms of the product, then the product can be scaled up, because as I indicated earlier, there are 28 states in India with 50 odd cities, all spread across the Indian market. And each of the cities and states today, India's more or less 90% of the India is good in terms of the states and cities in terms of the healthcare infrastructure. So there is a potential to exponentially scale up once the traction and the adoption of the product happens. What would be the accelerator playbook ideally? If it is an FDA, EU MDR certified device, it becomes faster. It could be both of a digital health product or a medical device product. So the scaling would happen much faster if it is already certified by either EU MDR or FDA. 3 to 4 months would be the timeline which would be required for the pilot studies and the distributor onboarding, because there has to be pilot studies and closely interact with the key opinion leaders, so that in case of any challenges, specifically in terms of the Indian market, the manufacturer along with the distributor has to closely work with the key opinion leader, and then subsequently further additional distributors can be onboarded for the scaling up to happen. Parallelly, the regulatory classification can be done. So as I indicated, at least one distributor would be required as per the Indian regulatory norms, and then we can essentially do that. And 6+ months would be the approximate time where the market entry would actually gain traction. So, we start with a distributor, then we start with the regulatory certification. Parallelly, we go on with the pilot studies, and within 6 to 9 months of time, the entire market, the product is ready for scaling up and for market scale up. So this is just a brief in terms of how the Indian market is. So just to give you a brief. Now we are open to questions. Please go ahead. Yeah. Over to you,
Thank
David.
you very much, Krish. Awesome. Great presentation. I can see that we have 19 in the meeting. So please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question. It's open forum now for the next 40 minutes. Use the time, guys. I can start while we're waiting. I actually have a question, Krish.
Yes, please.
When it comes to, I don't know if you can, compare the cultures in Europe and India, but if you look at India specifically, obviously there's a cultural difference, right? Between Northern Europe on one side and India on another. But what would you say is the major cultural, barrier for a European country to succeed in India?
Yeah, the major three important factors in terms of succeeding in India is there's a lot of perseverance which would be required. Indian market is unlike the American market, where you have a product, you go into the market, you find a distributor, you have the health reimbursement all worked out. It becomes easier to scale up. But in India, the traction takes certain amount of time. So there's a lot of perseverance, patience, which be required in terms of scaling up the product, in terms of accepting the product. So any company which is there in for the longer haul, let us say if you have an horizon of 3 to 5 years that you would sustain in the market, that is when the ideal way for you to enter into the Indian market. If I could give you a couple of examples specifically in terms of medtech, you have Siemens, which has been in India for a very long time. As we are all aware, Siemens is a German headquartered company. They have been there for decades as far as India is concerned. Then you have Philips Healthcare, which has also been in India for many, many years. So these are the type of companies who have succeeded, who have stayed, who have persevered. And that is very important because the customer has to feel that this player or this company is in the Indian market for the longer run. Okay, there have been many companies who entered into India thinking that this is another market where they could just try and see if the sales can be accelerated, and then you have a vision of 6 months or 1 year or what, it doesn't work, because then what happens is at some point of time the disappointment would creep in, because India, I know there is a culture of negotiation. Everybody wants value of money. So everybody would feel that you have given your last dollar or the last euro discount before they could finalize the deal. So this could be quite frustrating in Europe, because I've also worked with European companies and I've also met with European customers. It is a formality where it's just done as a gesture of goodwill, that you give certain amount of discount just as a gesture of goodwill to a European customer. Whereas the Indian customer, it would just be that they would test you. After the gesture of goodwill, then there would be another three rounds of negotiation. And then finally, when you've decided that you're going to clinch the deal, they would ask, is this your final? Have you actually bottomed out? So this could be a little, a little challenging for the European company. But over a period of time, you would get used to it. Because in India, like the Nordic, the relationship matters the most. Once you are there, once there is a relationship which is built up, then obviously you can capitalize on that. So please come into India if you are in for the long run. If you want to persevere and you have an horizon for 3 to 5 years, that is ideal for you to enter into the Indian market. Yes.
Awesome.
Wow.
Thanks. Great answers. and great opportunities, I think. And obviously, if you have a clear understanding on the cultural differences, that makes things easier. And as you said, in Europe, things tend to be standardized, prices are set, and then you come into a negotiative market, and your mindset may have to change a little bit. So even the large players that establish themselves in India, such as Siemens and so on and so forth, do they also need to adapt to this in terms of negotiation?
Yes, they also have to go through the negotiation process, even though Siemens is the market leader, in terms of that sense, in terms of at least for imaging and radiology, they are a market leader. But even for them, for every customer, with every customer, it's a new transaction. It could be you're already using Siemens, you are well known to Siemens, but when you're buying a new equipment, you would still go through the process of discussions and negotiations, etc. So that could be, challenging, but once you get used to the culture, then it becomes easier for you to navigate as far as the Indian market is concerned. The second most important factor is that you have to ensure that there is flexibility in terms of the approach, because there could be many times where there are certain factors. For example, I work with a company, interacted with an European company, so they produce the products in Europe and they wanted to ship it to other parts of Asia. But then, unfortunately, the company did not have an understanding with the freight forwarding agent. So what happens when you do not have an understanding with the freight forwarding agent? You cannot give the export terms in terms of CIF or FOB, because what the Indian customer wants is, what is the price which I will get if I have to come into my port in India? So they would say, all our prices are Ex Works. Whatever you need to do, you can discuss with your freight forwarder. You can pick it up from our warehouse. But that doesn't work. You will have to be flexible. You will have to find ways and means. There could be surprises on the way, but just being flexible is very important, because there can be no standard terms and conditions which works in Europe or in the American market would work in India. So if you are ready to be flexible, yes, yeah.
Can I ask you just a basic question? Because most of the startups here, they are tech startups, and I'm quite sure that most of them, they don't know what Ex Works, FOB, and CIF is. So could you just quickly explain what is cost insurance price, what is free on board, what is Ex Works?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Ex Works is generally, let's say if you have an hardware cum software device, Ex Works is that you have manufactured the product, you have just kept it in your warehouse. If I need to buy it, I need to figure out with a freight forwarder that the freight forwarder will go to your warehouse, pick up the device, and then ship it to me wherever I am based out of India. That is essentially the Ex Works. What happens in terms of CIF is that is you will ensure that from the warehouse, it will go to your port. Let us say you're based out of Sweden. You will ensure that the device reaches your Sweden port, and from the Sweden port, it becomes a responsibility of my freight forwarder to pick it up from the Sweden port. That is CIF. So you would not be concerned about the transportation charges from Sweden to India, because that is left to the prerogative of my freight forwarder. The FOB is that you would discuss with the freight forwarder or your own freight forwarder that the product which is produced by you at your factory is actually picked up by your freight forwarder and delivered to the Indian port before the customs clearance. So that is called the FOB. That is still the Indian port is your responsibility. And once it lands in the Indian port, then it becomes the responsibility of the buyer to have it customs cleared and taken it to his address wherever he is located in India. So these are the three terms. So generally, CIF is the most way, because the global medtech company is not concerned about what it would happen between Sweden to India, etc. But at least till CIF, that you would ensure that it would reach the Stockholm airport or wherever, and from there the freight forwarder, the Indian freight forwarder, can pick it up. Just to give you an example, it is not that I completely understand these are tech startups and probably may not be used to these terms, but just wanted to highlight the fact that you have to be slightly flexible, and you cannot have a policy which works for Europe will necessarily work for the Indian market. Yes.
Great, thank you. We have a hand here from Stefan Pettersson. Go on, Stefan.
Hi, Krish. very much of what you're talking about is in the area of physical hardware products combined with software. But if many of our companies is actually doing digital therapeutics, it's just digital products where you don't have to consider this. But is there any rules applying to just that part as well? Because it's usually in a form of an app or something else.
Yeah, if it's usually in the form of an app or a software link or AI powered, ideally we actually do not have to worry too much about the regulatory that will essentially follow on later on. But the first step is to try and understand where the product fits into the Indian market and identify a few key opinion leaders so that they can start using the product and understand and give feedback as far as the utility of the product with respect to the Indian market. So I think that would be important. But if it is just an app in terms of nutrition or something like that, probably there are many of them available in India which would not work. But there is something which is unique in terms of, I worked with a Portuguese company. So the company had a post-processing software for cardiac MRI applications. So then that could be a good software or an AI-powered product. Or probably I worked with an Asian company which had a AI-powered software for wound management, chronic wound management. That is, patients are unable to come to the hospital if you have a chronic wound, if you have a diabetic foot wound. Every time, it becomes difficult because your leg is in a bad state. So you would not be able to come to the hospital every time. So then there is a wound scanner which is AI powered and which will enable the images to be taken and sent across to the doctor. So in those cases, directly we can start working with the key opinion leaders so that the regulatory part can be done much later, but essentially to understand how the product or the app or the AI powered software link can assist in the workflow as far as the hospital is concerned pertaining to the Indian conditions.
Thank you.
Great.
Yes, you can ask any questions specific to India, no problems, because I'm sure some of you may have visited India. Some of you, for some of you, Indian market could be a new challenge. So please go ahead and ask any questions you have specific to India.
If you compare, the level of compliance in Europe and US, for example, you have the FDA and you have the MDR and these kind of things. Would you say that the Indian level is more difficult, or is it lower, or is it about same on par on level?
No, Indian level is evolving. It's just that it's just started about a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, to become a little more stringent. So today it becomes a little more difficult if the product, as I told you, hardware comes software has to be imported into India, then it has to pass through the port of entry or the customs point in India. So at that point of time, the regulatory certification becomes very important, but it is not so stringent like the European or the US FDA. So there could still be leeway. Ideally we work with consultants because I am not as expert as far as regulatory compliance processes are concerned, because there is a process, there is certain documentation which should be required. So there are regulatory consultants in India who would help in ensuring that the product is rightly classified. For example, if a product is classified as a class 1 or a class 2 as far as FDA is concerned, it need not necessarily classify as class A or class B. So you will have to ensure that there is proper guidance given to the regulatory consultant in terms of how the product can be classified, and based on which the regulatory consultant will help in the documentation process and the regulatory structural process which will be required for the certification. Typically, if it is a class A, which is a non-sterile, non-measuring device, it is very simple. You would get the certification in 1 week. No, it's just an online certification. When you progress into class B, which is slightly a little more riskier and where there is a measuring aspect involved, etc., then it could take anything between 10 to 12 weeks into terms of that. And ideally, class B or class C. Class B is very, very high risk products. That could be either invasive products, etc. But most of the products will fit into class B or class C, and generally the timeline could be between 10 to 16 weeks, etc., working closely with the regulatory consultant, and they would in turn work with the regulatory authority to get the certification as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Krish.
Thank you. I can see that we have Erika Bonds with us on the call. And I was just curious to see, because you have a lot of international experience, if you, Erika, have some thoughts or questions based on this. Erika, are you with us?
We're asking you because we can see you
Yes.
typing.
I am typing. I am actually typing a question. So
Yeah,
I'm thinking I've got some experience, and I think it's so interesting to talk about India as a market, because it's a huge market, and when we have got to have a discussion with someone, I get one picture and one idea, and then someone else from another area tells me something completely different. So these are the things, it just feels enormous, like what's the actual truth. So we're building and selling a command center for hospitals, and the bigger the organization, the more benefit it is for them to get the overview. So we've actually already implemented a command center previously at another company, and they were implementing this at a huge hospital to get the communication with a small hospital. So they were super modern, and I know they have command centers in ICU since years and years back. But then on the other hand, we know that there are lots and lots of hospitals and areas that are not this digitalized already. So my question is, when approaching India, how do we think about pricing? What do we compare with? What is a reasonable, because we've all within tech industry seen that the tech consultants from India are a lot cheaper than our hours here in Europe. So how will that affect pricing? And we still have the licenses and those prices. So how should we think what is reasonable? I don't know, comparing if you know Germany well or something like that. And the other thing I was going to ask is that also the context I've previously had in India was when they already had one part of the market and were upselling, but when we're interested in entering completely new markets, from our point of view, even though someone is interested in our solution, how do we know what is the pathway to actually getting a contract signed? So how you talked about a little bit of longer sales cycles, but even if you would approach a private hospital, what would that mean in how high in the hierarchy would one have to go? So the reason, I know it was not one question, but these are the things on top of my head.
Absolutely. Perfect. So in India, we have a process called price discovery. So what we do is, because I told you, Indian market is not driven by health insurance. So generally, when a product is launched into India, or you plan to expand into India in terms of the tech or in terms of a command center for a hospital, etc., we start closely working with 3 or 4 key opinion leaders in terms of they would derive how the product or the device or anything else could be utility in terms of the workflow of the hospital or for the clinician. So once they have that, then they would come back and say, look, Krish, or look, Stefan, this is what is, would ensure that this could be a cost saving for me, or this is something which I can charge extra to the patient. I'm giving something extra to the patient in terms of the facility, or in terms of a second opinion, or in terms of digitizing my smaller clinics, smaller hospitals spread across India with one big command center, which is located in one of the bigger cities in India. So this is where the cost proposition comes in. So everything is intangibly tied to the cost. So what is it that the hospital would be saving in terms of the cost, or can charge a little bit extra to the patient? Because as I told you earlier, every patient pays from his or her own pocket predominantly. So they would be able to arrive at some sort of a cost, saying that, okay, fine, we have done our cost analysis. For us, this could be a proposition, a value proposition, or this could be a cost price, a price which would be acceptable to us in terms of scheme of things. So we come back and communicate to the company saying that this is what this could be a few X dollars, which could be the price which would be acceptable to the hospital or to the clinician. Now you will have to go back to your drawing room or drawing board and find out what is it that you can do in terms of the minimum cost, in terms of the profit percentages. Every company has a different pricing structure for India. If you see, because I've worked with global companies, many of the global companies have a certain pricing pattern for the European and the American market, and they have a different pricing strategy for the Indian market. So ultimately, you will have to go back to your drawing board and say that if I'm entering into a new market, probably I would have to sustain, at least not lose money, but if I'm able to sustain my operations for the next 2, 3, 4 years, then I can build on the business, etc. So what is it that would be a cost acceptable to be? So that is the formula which most of the companies work on. So you cannot have the percentage of profit which is generally added on to the cost in terms of the other markets work for the Indian market. So this is a two-way parallel process. One is that you do the analysis on your drawing board and come back and say that this could be a minimum price which work fine with my company, my management, my board. And there is a feedback which comes from the end user also, saying that this is what could be acceptable to the hospital. Probably they would try and negotiate on whatever they say. Probably we could say that that could be a discounted price, but then we could add, say, 10, 20, 25% premium on that. So that is where, we have the price discovery process. So that's a two-way process which has to come in from the inputs on this. So we cannot say that you have a pricing which you're selling in the European, the American market, and the same pricing, or say, let's say a discount of $10 will work in the Indian market. That doesn't work that way. So that is where the important thing is. That's why I said the entire journey of 6 to 9 months initially is a lot of learning process, where you would try and understand how the market dynamics work and what is it that would be the best way to move forward. It's always a case of try and do it. That's why I said you have to be flexible and adaptable. There cannot be a formula which will say that this is the formula which I'm going to go with the Indian market. You will have to be flexible and adaptable. So the first 6 to 9 months becomes extremely critical as far as that aspect is concerned. And what was the second part of your question?
Second part was who is signing, who has
Yeah.
the authority to
Yeah.
actually sign deals at
Yes.
hospital?
Yeah. So every hospital is a new customer. Every hospital is a new customer. So if you have signed with one of the tertiary hospitals a contract, that does not necessarily mean the same terms would be adopted with another hospital situated in a different city, unless they belong to the same chain, the same family, etc. Let's say if it's Apollo Group. I'm sure you would have heard of the Apollo Group, which is the most famous in India. They have hospitals across the country. So if you sign a deal with the Apollo headquarters based out of Chennai, you can for sure replicate the same terms to the other hospitals in the other parts of the country. But if you're going to a different hospital, then you will still have to work a way upwards in terms of meeting the purchase department, going to the management level, discussing with the CXO, and then finally the CEO of the hospital or the chain would give this. So it is possible. It is possible that you could do that, but everything has to be, there's a lot of effort which has to be done. Something which worked when one hospital need not, I'm not saying cannot, it can possibly work. 80% of that terms can work with the other hospital, but that will also be evaluated as a new vendor, a new global company, and then the terms would be negotiated differently. So everything can be done, but only thing is, that's why I said you need to have certain local support who would guide these companies in terms of ensuring that you are addressing it in the proper way in terms of the business culture. Yes.
Thanks, Chris. Erika, are you happy with the answer? Yep, awesome. I see that Daniel Malm has a question here. Before I get to you, Daniel, I have a question to you, Chris, as well, linked to what Erika just asked you and your answer. When it comes to, it seems like there's a lot of privately driven healthcare in India. How would you say is the balance between the government healthcare and private healthcare? Is it like the same size, or is one more dominant than the other?
80%, 70 to 80% is private 20% is government. Government actually caters to, so most of the people, when you come in as a delegation, as a part of a country delegation, let's say you're coming in as a Nordic delegation to India, they generally come in, meet the big hospitals. They would give a macro view of the Indian market, health, etc. But that will not necessarily translate into traction. The traction happens when you engage with the mid-level hospitals and the second tier key opinion leaders, because the top hospitals are very big. The tertiary hospitals are very big. They do not have the time to encourage and interact with a startup or a tech company coming from outside the country. So it's always better to do it with the mid-level hospitals, with the key opinion leaders there. And 80% of the market is 70 to 80% of the market is driven by the private health segment. So it's always better to focus on the private health segment, because if you go into the government, then there are too many conditions, stringent conditions. It happens through tender. You have to have a presence in India for at least 3 to 5 years, or have to go through a distributor who has had a substantially long presence in the Indian market. So generally, it's always better to focus on the private market. And once you have settled, stabilized in the Indian market for a period of 3 to 5 years, that's when you can start looking at the other business opportunities. Yeah.
I think that's extremely important information, what you just came up with here, because typically it's better or easier actually to deal with private hospitals than government, even here in Europe. So it's interesting that it's so dominant in India, and it would also be interesting to see how the private market is structured. I mean, I'm quite sure that there's kind of 80-20 rule here as well, that you have a few chains that dominate most of the hospitals, and then you have a few others that are more independent, right?
Yes.
Typically
So
it's
the
like that,
chains,
yeah.
the chains are generally the tertiary level hospitals. The biggest hospital, I'm sure, even if you Google, would be the Apollo Group, which is they're the largest. They have many hospital chains, hospitals across India. Then you have the Max Group. Then you have the Fortis Group. So these are some of the key chain of hospitals, which are very big. They are essentially tertiary hospitals. So we always go into the mid-level hospitals, a hospital which is say 50 bedded, 100 bedded, etc. So there you have the hospital run by a few group of doctors. So there it becomes easier for the decision making process, etc. If you go into the tertiary hospital, it's a very long chain because they are very big. No, you go, I come and try to sell something to the government of Sweden. It is very difficult. So it is something like that. It's very difficult to come and convince the tertiary hospital to adopt your product, etc. So it's always better to go to the mid-level hospitals and gain that traction, etc. And subsequently, when there is noise made as far as the product is concerned, then you can obviously go to the tertiary level or the hospital chains. Yeah.
Excellent. We have two questions here. Stefan, I see you, but Daniel was first. So I'm going to go to Daniel Malm first here now. Daniel, are you with us? Can you switch on your camera and microphone?
Yep. Yes. You hear me?
You have a question as well, right?
Yes, actually I have two questions. My first question is, I was actually a patient at Apollo in Chennai, and they seem to be working around the clock. My question is, what about the market for, or the focus on employee well-being, organizational and social work environment? Is that a topic at all in India?
Yes, employee well-being is something which is not, it's there because obviously today the corporate, in terms of the productivity, it becomes an important factor as far as the Indian market is concerned. So there has to be a certain focus in terms of the corporate, programs which is done. So what has to be done is, there are a lot of private companies which are functioning in India, may not work with the government institutions, but will work. There are many private companies in India, and specifically the mid and the high level companies. So there you go to the human resources department and position the employee well-being program. So there are a lot of things, there's mental health, etc., which is all coming into focus at the current juncture. So it is there, but that has to be focused ideally on corporates, on private companies, and that would be an ideal market as far as that is concerned. So that we also have programs, in terms of mental health, in terms of employee well-being. There are regular checkups once in a year. Employee has to go through a annual checkup in terms of the preventive health, etc., which is paid by the company. So there is definitely a market,
Yeah.
but the segment would not be hospitals or the nursing homes, but the segment would be the corporate companies which are focused on employee well-being. Yes.
Okay. Is there a shortage of nurses in India, or is the readily available workforce?
Nurses?
Yes.
Nurses are available in plenty in India, but unlike the other markets, they are not empowered. In, for example, in UK or in the Western markets, the nurses play a very important role. I tell you this with confidence because I've worked in the wound care market. So what is, the nurses in the other markets play a very significant decision-making role. But in India, the nurses are more like an assistant. They are just like a support to the doctor, because ultimately the patient pays from the pocket and the patient would like to interact with the doctor. So what the doctor says is the final word, and the nurses only assist the doctor. So nurses are there in plenty, but they do not have a key role unlike the other Western markets.
Okay. My second question was about operational efficiency, like drugs inventory management or asset management, asset tracking services for assets that wander around the hospital.
Yes, I know these are ultimately these are conceptual in nature. Probably there could be certain solutions available in the Indian market currently in terms of inventory tracking, in terms of efficiency management, etc. But ultimately, it said this would work on larger hospitals, and they would look at what is the ultimate cost saving for them. It is not something which is, unlike the Western market, they would say, oh, my hospital would be able to run more efficiently, so I would like to have the solution. In India, if I take the solution, what is it that I will save in terms of the cost? If I'm able to save $50,000, then probably I would be interested in looking at the solution. If it is not, so there is a direct proposition in terms of a cost saving element. Yes.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, Daniel, you happy?
Thanks. Perfect. Thank you.
Move on to Stefan.
Yes, I'm just trying to understand the market. If you are an Indian middle-class family, and hospitals are expensive, and 80% of what you do is paid out of pocket from yourself, does a standard middle-class family set off some money for health costs?
Yeah, so in India, if you have to be fortunate not to become sick, not to be that's the way it is. So you're lucky if you're not you don't fall sick. If you fall sick, then it could be a great impact on your pocket, on your finances, etc. So generally, obviously, you would have saved some money, but depending on that, if it is certain things like you have a headache, or you have a fall, you have a fracture, you can the family can still afford that. If you have a fracture, you need to be admitted to the hospital, and probably you take 2 or 3 weeks, you have all this rest, etc. The family can still afford. But if you, let's say, if I could use the word, suppose if you have cancer, then it becomes very difficult for a family to sustain. A middle class family cannot sustain that, both in terms of the person, because the person, you need someone to support the person. You also need to support the person financially. Then if you really have a cancer, or one of the, you have Alzheimer's, or you have some of those, then it becomes very tough if you are a middle class family. But if you have small things like you have a fracture, you have temperature, you have to be in the hospital for 1 week, the middle class family can still afford it. Yeah, can still manage the finances. Let me put it that way. Yeah.
A follow-up on that one. There is no private health insurances that you can buy as a...
Yeah, private health insurances, generally, if you are an employee of a company, the company gives you a policy, you turn that. If you are a senior citizen, let us say you have earned your money and you have retired, then just to ensure you do not have any surprises, you insure yourself. But then there are also many rejections which happen in the health insurance policy in India, because there are many stringent conditions. You have to state what are your pre-existing diseases. Then there is a window period for 1 year or 2 years where your claims would not be allowed. So it's a little complicated, complex, etc. So it is there, to long and short is there, it is there, but probably does not serve a majority of the population. The government has introduced a scheme, but that is a scheme which is for a limited amount of period for the lower class population. That, you have to go to a government hospital, you are covered by that. That is essentially focused on the lower income population class, may not be the right fit for the middle class of the population. And middle class, if they, it's an insurance premium, again, you have to pay from your pocket. So 1 year you don't have any claims, you don't get any benefit. So the next year again you have to pay the claims, and you are also worried of the fact that whether if you get admitted to hospital, then you have the long thing of getting the claim approved, and many times they reject the claims also. So there's a little more complex in the whole process. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I learned a lot today.
Yeah, me too. I think I can ask you 100 more questions, but we have 6 minutes left. Any more questions? Nobody? So should we try to conclude this then, Krish?
Yeah, I would just suggest, I would just indicate if anyone, even if they, after the meeting, if they have any questions or they just want to explore the Indian market, etc., we can always, give them inputs, whatever is, no issues on this. If they have a product, they go back to them and they want to see how the Indian market, we can always support them. No problems at all. Yeah.
Can I share your contact details with the participants here, and they can reach out to you? Is that
absolutely perfect? More than happy to help them. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, because that was my last question actually. What would be the next step now for a startup? Because obviously there's so much information. India seems to be big and far away, and where do I start? And perhaps the best start is to contact you and have a chat and see, and maybe you can
contact me, and I would just give them what in my understanding is, in terms of what the product they have, what is the best right way for them to expand into the Indian market, give them the suggestions, and then it is up to them, to the management of their company, to decide if they would like to take the first step in terms of addressing the Indian market. But whatever we do it with a lot of sincerity and with a lot of effort in trying to see that we want to help someone, because I have been associated with the Nordic companies in my professional life. So I know exactly what is it in their mind, and the trust factor plays a major important role. So we would try and support them the best way possible. Not a problem.
Great. And what I can say for you, Krish, is that most of the companies are not necessarily med tech companies. Some of them are, but most of them, as we define, is health tech, is more preventive care, is typically digital, not necessarily a physical object that needs to be moved from Europe to India. It's more of a downloadable sort of SaaS service. So that makes it easier, I think, in general.
Perfect. If it's anything related to health tech in terms of digital health, I would be able to support them, not a problem. If it is something out of my purview, let's say into logistics or into automobiles, probably I don't have the expertise on that. But if it is anything to do with health tech, digital health, I would definitely be able to support them on this. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much, Krish, and for participating and giving us these insights. I think it was very interesting, actually.
Very, very.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Nice to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And what I'll do now is that I've recorded this session, so we will upload it to our YouTube channel. And for you that are in cohort number 9, you will have it in your typical playlist that you've had so far. But we see here that we have a few alumni and a few incubator companies as well. So we'll make a new playlist for you guys, and we'll put the mentor sessions there as well. We'll send it by email.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
And weekend.